Now let's get lesson 4A started. In the next preview assignment in the next class, you're going to need to be able to, wow, convert a fraction to a decimal, as well as multiply, add, and subtract fractions. So in mathematics, there is a thing called a vinculum, and it's a horizontal line placed above quantities to indicate that they're forming a group. And one use for this is to separate the numerator and the denominator of a fraction. So that thing right there is called, a fancy word, vinculum. And one use of this is not only to separate, but also it can represent or be a clue that when you see that, when you're not real sure what thing you need to do, hopefully it's going to be a reminder that you can divide. Because it says one way to think about converting a fraction to a decimal is to let the vinculum remind you of a division bar and divide the numerator by the denominator. So this 20 over 4 and 20/4 and 20 divided by 4, those all represent the same value, the same operation, the same numbers. But often students will put these in a calculator backwards and come up with a number that does not make sense and then definitely does not help them to continue on getting accurate answers. So a little bit of practice. If you have 1/2, you probably maybe already know that the decimal value is going to be 0.5 or 0.50. You might even know that the percentage value is 50%. But I want you to practice punching this into your calculator and make sure that you do 1 divided by 2 and this or this shows up on your calculator screen. Because if you're doing that, then you have successfully taken a fraction and converted it to a decimal. However, it is crucial, very vital, that you enter numbers in the correct order. Because remember that half of a donut, like right here, this is a half is a half, this is a half of a donut, is in no way the same as 2 donuts. Because oftentimes I've seen students punch this in incorrectly and have 2 on their screen. And you've got to keep in mind that literally a half is not going to be 2 full donuts. It's just going to be a half, or 0.5 or 5/10. This is a great time to hit pause and go ahead and complete question 1, all the parts, and then come back and watch the video with me. The directions ask us to rewrite the fraction using a division symbol and then give the decimal value of each. So this is 4 divided by 5. When I go to punch this in a calculator, I need to punch in 4 divided by 5. And when I do, something along the lines of maybe 81/100ths, probably more likely 8/10ths, will show up on the screen. We'll keep going with this. Pronounced, using the vinculum, talking about division, this one is 1 divided by 4. When I punch this in a calculator, I'm going to get 0.25 or 25/100ths. You may actually see just this on your calculator, and it is appropriate to use the leading zero or not use one. To me, I like using a leading zero because it seems to make the number look better, and it also cuts down on some confusion as to where the decimal is. It makes it a little bit more clear. Again, it's your option. So part C asks us to rewrite using the division bar and punch it in a calculator, and you should probably will see this on your screen, but I like that leading zero. So 75/100ths is our decimal value. We converted a fraction to a decimal. Make some notes about this and let's keep going. Go ahead and hit pause. You complete question 2, parts A and B alone, and then come back and we'll work these together. If you were in the class, we would be doing a lot of this work together. You would get feedback from people sitting beside you, in front of you, behind you. I would be walking around helping you. And if there's any way that you can complete some of these, maybe in our tutoring center, or if you've met some people in our class that y'all can meet at a local coffee shop, the more that you can collaborate with others, the more information that you can share and that will be solidified in your brain and in your calculations. So if it's possible, work through these with a friend. Looking at question 2, part A, it says, let's convert each fraction to a decimal. We've already talked about how the vinculum means divide, So I'm going to grab my scientific calculator. I'm going to punch in correctly 5 divided by 6, and I get this on my calculator screen. I get more directions that ask me to round this to the nearest hundredth. And so rounding means if it's hundredths, this is the hundredths place value. I'm going to look immediately to its right. The 3 tells me that my 3 is going to stay where it is. Everyone else will get dropped off. And our final answer, 5/6 written as a decimal, is 83 hundredths. We'll keep going down here with part B. Either memorize 2/3 or punch 2/3 into a calculator. 2 divided by 3 shows up on the screen as this. Again, I'm being asked to round to the nearest hundredth, so I'm going to go to the tenths hundredths place. I'm going to look immediately to its right. The 6 is greater than 5, so before they drop off, that means the 6 is going to cause my hundredths 6 to round up 1, and 2/3 as a fraction, written now as a decimal, is 67 hundredths. We're going to do a little bit more work with converting fractions because here it says even improper fractions, where the numerator is larger than the denominator, can be converted to decimal numbers using the same process. You and we just had proper fractions where the numerator was smaller than the denominator, and now that's different. The denominator is larger. We can still follow the same process, and then we're going to round to the nearest whole number or the nearest unit. If we were talking about gallons, feet, inches, miles. Before we start working this together, I need you to hit pause, complete all of question 3 by yourself, and then come back and work through it with me. So punching in 615 divided by 63, because now I know which direction to punch. I'm not going to make errors on that. I end up with a number along these lines on my screen. But since they're asking us to round to the nearest unit or the nearest whole number, the 9 is in the whole number or units place. The 7 is bigger than 5, so it means that my final number is 10. We're going to keep going. I'm going to punch in 923 divided by 143, and this is showing up on my calculator. The 45s are repeating. So this is about rounded to the nearest whole number. There's my whole number. The 4 is less than 5, so there is no change to my 6. So the nearest whole number is going to be 6. We're going to keep going. We've got a couple of decimals in here. Some of the work you have done either in class or in earlier worksheets had decimals, and there are multiple ways that we can handle those. These specific directions are asking us to go ahead and convert the fraction to a decimal. I'll follow what we've been doing on the dividing, and I'm getting something along these lines. I need to round to the nearest whole number. When I look at the 0, 0 is less than 5, so there's no change to my number. I get a 26. Finally, I'm dividing 100 by 87 hundredths, and I get 114.94, etc. And when I go to round, I look at my whole number place. The 9 is larger than 5. That's going to cause my 4 to go up to a 5. Everyone else drops out of the race here. And to the nearest whole number, we have 115. I want to remind you that in your My Math Lab online homework program that goes with the Math 1332 course, you have an in-class notebook, student notebook, and in the back of it or at the bottom, if you're looking at it electronically, there are resources. There are some resources, specifically one page or pages are called fractions, decimals, and percentages. If any of this is still shaky, or if you just want to look at it one more time, go find this resource and spend some moments looking at fractions, decimals, and percentages. The last skill we're going to look at would be the skill of multiplying fractions. We need to do it accurately. We need to not be afraid of it. We're going to talk about what that means to multiply fractions, but I do want to point out again, there is a resource in the back of your 1332 book One is called multiplying and dividing fractions. The other is called equivalent fractions. To get more information, you can always use an internet browser and search that way, but you do have some right at your fingertips or on your computer that you can go look at these resources in your 1332 book. The directions, though, do talk to us about that when we multiply fractions, we do that by multiplying the numerator times the numerator times the numerator, as many as there are, and then put that answer in a brand new numerator. Then we multiply all the denominator times the denominator times the denominator, as many as there are, and then place that in the new denominator, and voila, we have multiplied fractions. However, we are going to need to reduce our fractions into lowest terms, and that might be a reason to go look at the equivalent fractions resource. Now's the time to hit pause, go complete all of question 4. And this is not our last section. We do have part A and part B. So look at part A and part B on question 4, and then come back and watch the video with me. Following the directions listed above, to multiply fractions, you're going to multiply all of the numerators together. So 1 times 1. And you're going to multiply all of the denominators together. In this case, it's 6 times 2. And we get 1 divided by 12. And we're done. And somebody emailed me today asking about how do we know and how do we reduce. And this is something that you have to practice. And when you look at this, it is 1 divided by 12, kind of like the 1 divided by 2. It's not even a full dollar. It's not even a full donut. So don't make the mistake and just decide you're going to call this 12. This is 1/12, 1/12 of a whole something. So when we multiply to half of a sixth, then we're getting something that's even smaller than the sixth itself. And we are in lowest terms. The question of how to know if you're in lowest terms, you can start to answer part of that when you look right here. If you have any numbers, numerator to denominator, or numerator to denominator that have common factors, and if you're a bit shaky on multiplication, there are lots of websites where you can practice electronic flashcards on multiplication. Don't let something that you don't feel very comfortable in a mathematics concept slow you up. Go conquer it. And so you've got to be strong in multiplication and factoring, which is division, or pulling apart factors, which it's division, to be able to start to notice, when am I done? When have I finished or simplified or fully reduced a fraction? Sometimes people will reduce before they get started, and sometimes they like to go ahead and it doesn't matter. You can go ahead and multiply tops times tops times tops, and 3 times 3, it's going to get us 9. And you can multiply all the bottoms together, and 6 times 6 is going to get us 36. So if you want to go ahead and write this as 9 times 36, and then you notice they both have 9 as a factor, it's 1 times 9 for the numerator and 4 times 9 in the denominator. 9 divided by 9 becomes 1, and we have a reduced fraction of 1/4. That could have happened over here at the beginning. If I have 3/6 times 3/6, I have permission to reduce anything from the numerator to the denominator because of this multiplication. Like 3 goes into 3 once, 3 can go into this 6 twice. 3 can go into 3 once, 3 can go into this 6 twice. And when I multiply top times top and bottom times bottom, I get to 1/4 faster. Neither way is better or worse. You just need to find a way that works for you and stick with it accurately. Now we are in our last section for this lesson. Adding and subtracting fractions. We looked at changing fractions to decimals. We've looked at multiplying fractions and reducing them. Now you need to be very comfortable adding and subtracting fractions. Practicing this is going to help you when we start looking at probability in our Math 1332 class. But in order to add or subtract fractions, you've got to have a common denominator. It can't be done. Well, I guess you can do it and you come up with the wrong answers, but multiplying fractions is, to me, easy peasy. You multiply tops, you multiply bottoms, and you're there. You got to do some more work to add and subtract fractions. You can also do what you've practiced in some of the other 0232 lessons. Go ahead and change it over to decimals and then put them together that way. Lots of various ways you can accomplish this. Make sure that whichever way you do it, you're rounding carefully and that you're being accurate. Make sure whatever way you're going to use, you use it correctly and accurately, and that you follow through with all of the directions through to rounding. So it's time to hit pause. You do parts A, B, and C on 5 by yourself, and then come back and we'll do them together. This says perform the following operations. If you do use a common denominator, write your answer in lower terms. If you use a calculator, round them to the nearest hundredth. On these, I'm going to go ahead and focus. I say that I am because it's getting to be a longer lesson than what I intended. Let's see how it goes. Let's go ahead and start with using fractions, and I'm going to show you a shortcut, a way to fudge around maybe the way you learned how to do common denominators, and you have to do this accurately. But if you have a fraction plus a fraction, you're allowed to do a very quick common denominator by multiplying, and you got to be careful which ones you're multiplying here, these two together, keeping the addition symbol, and then multiplying these two together. All of this is going to go in our numerator. And then you finish up by multiplying the denominators together. It's not the smallest way or simplest or most reduced way to find a common denominator and add, but it's a quick and dirty way to get the task done. So right here, I'm going to follow what I just mentioned. I'm going to multiply 1 times 6 together. I'm going to keep the addition symbol, and then I'm going to multiply these other two together, 2 times 1. I'm now going to go in and multiply the denominators together, and if I remember right, it's a 2 and a 6, and put it over 12. And so now my fraction is 8 over 12. It's a quick way to find a common denominator, but remember, if we're using fractions, we're going to write them in our lowest terms. 4 is a common factor of 12 and 8. 4 and 2, 4 and 3, this is a way to do it. The 4 over 4 becomes 1, and I end up with 2/3. So that was adding these using a common denominator. We can also add these using a fraction, converting to a decimal. So if I had 1/2 plus 1/6, I know that 1/2 is 5/10 from what we did in our lesson earlier. I'll go ahead and divide 1 divided by 6, and I get 0.166666. I'm going to leave that on my calculator and add back in the 0.5, and I get 0.666. You get the idea. Rounded to the nearest hundredth, there's my hundredths. This value puts us at 67 hundredths. So we now have the fraction value, the decimal value, and a quick way to double check. Let's just punch this in the calculator. And when I punch 2 divided by 3 in the calculator, I get something very familiar. Looks like we're doing this accurately and we got it right. We're now going to keep going with parts B and C. Again, if you haven't already stopped to work these on your own, there is much value in you getting this in your fingertips, even making mistakes, so that you can go back and find where you messed up, talk to yourself, make some notes, and that's part of the learning process, includes a productive struggle. So here I'm going to start with my 1/3. Oh, I'm so sorry. 1/2 minus 1/3. I'm going to go ahead and use my cheesy shortcut. 1 times 3, keep the sign, and 2 times 1. Put it over the bottom 2 multiplied together, and I end up with 1/6. If I punch in 1/2 minus 1/3, 1/2 is 0.5, 1/3 is, as you see here. So by punching in 0.5 minus 0.33333, I'm getting 0.16666, and it would round to a 7, but to the nearest hundredth, I need to go to my hundredths, look beside, and I get 0.17. So I am showing this as a reduced fraction and as a decimal. Just for grins, I'm going to punch this one in the calculator, and 1 divided by 6 is pretty exciting that it turns out to be exactly what we had gotten by using just decimals and not a common denominator. Let's end up this lesson at part C. Again, I'm going to do my shortcut and get 24 minus 3 over 36. So 21/36. Not real sure what to go into both of these, but an old trick, if you can add up the digits, 2 and 1, and it's a 3, 3 is divisible by 3. 3 and a 6 add up to be a 9. Aha, 9 is divisible by 3. These both are divisible by 3. So that's what I'm going to use. The 3 over 3 becomes 1, and we get 7/12. And we've crossed over the 20 mark, so I'm just going to tell you that the decimal value is 58 hundredths, and we're getting out of this lesson. And you need to check your calendar. If this is your last lesson that's due by our deadline this week, then you're done for the week. If not, go find some more videos to watch and some more worksheets to fill out.